And I think if we change workplaces, we can change the world. Because I always say, imagine a world where we all left work and we felt good. Like imagine how that carries over into our communities and society. Less road rage, like less anger, like nicer interactions. I think we can get there, but it's going to take a lot of structural change.
Welcome to the Wellable Weekly Podcast, where we talk about the key topics and trends at the intersection of well-being, technology, and HR. I'm Geoff, and I'd like to welcome a very special guest to the show today, Chase Sterling. She's the founder and executive director of Wellbeing Think Tank, has over 20 years of workplace wellness experience across Cigna, Google, many others, an Army veteran, has her master's in IO psychology, and has also spoken at a number of different events, including SHRM, IFEBP, NASA, Harvard, and is now a featured guest on Wellable Weekly. So Chase, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm glad to be here, Geoff.
Yeah. Chase, I feel like we have been a kind of passenger to all of the things that you have done over the years to lift up the broader well-being community, and Wellbeing Think Tank is a great example of that. So would love to just kind of hear what's the latest with Wellbeing Think Tank. Maybe you could just share a little bit about that for our listeners.
Sure. Wellbeing Think Tank started as a side of desk passion project while I was consulting full time. I saw a lot of gaps in the industry. As I like to say, when it comes to well-being at work, all you need to do is everything. And we tend to silo these issues. So when I think about the business problems, usually organizations are trying to solve two major problems: the problem of healthcare cost, and then the problem of attrition. And of course, productivity is always moved in there, that gross word that no one likes. And everything is impacting our well-being at work. It's leadership, it's policies, it's the environment, it is benefits, it is programs. But I wanted to try to break down silos and how we look at workplace well-being and really be able to take a step back and think about it strategically. And then it started to get bigger and bigger. So it has been my full-time job now since about Q4 of 23. So I now sit in the executive director role, and we're continuing to grow. We are a 501c3 charity, so we do a lot of free work for the community. We put out a ton of evidence-based resources. We also host free events every single month. And then we've launched a lot of cool new things this year. We launched memberships, providing more resources and convening of conversations. We held at our summit this year, we announced our awards, which go into place next year's summit. So we'll be handing out awards for the first time. And we have more trainings and workshops and lots of really great stuff coming out, really to support anyone who is working on creating a culture of well-being in the workplace.
That's awesome. Sounds like exciting things, and even more to come down the road. I mean, you mentioned that ugly word, productivity, right? Which I think for forever in our world has always been something that has been, I guess, an aspiration of organizations and those in HR, and to some extent, the relentless pursuit of businesses and workers alike. But it seems like now more than ever that word productivity is being tested, and the limits of what true, healthy productivity can look like. Kind of in this world of rapid technology adoption and change, particularly with the likes of AI. I feel like Nick and I have talked about how our podcast unintentionally has become an AI podcast because it seems to come up in so many different phases of life and work. Do you notice that as well in the conversations that occur in those different channels and forums at Wellbeing Think Tank? Do you feel as if that's just popping up more and more?
I appreciate you asking about productivity, because I always tell people productivity is a word I only use with organizations, like with the C-suite, with stakeholders doing this thing. As a worker, stop telling me about productivity. Our workers have been more productive than ever in the history of time. And things like wages haven't kept up with productivity. So I think for our workforce, we should focus on other things like focusing on fulfillment and accomplishment. But yeah, we are past testing the limits. We're past limits. I think we're seeing that as mental health issues continue to rise, stress continues to rise, burnout continues to rise. And I see leaders getting really confused as to why people are struggling so much when people are not machines. And AI is never going to be able to replace the human experience. And humans are starved for it. A lot of what I study is I study how the intergenerational workforce talks about work on social media. And while corporate is really pushing a lot of AI, I will tell you the workforce is pushing back against it. They are tired of it. They hate seeing it. There's a lot of trending topics right now. This week, like one of the themes is, if you're using AI in your marketing, I'm not going to buy from you. So I think consumers also are exhausted of AI. Nothing can replace human connection, and nothing can really replace our human workforce. I'm not completely like anti AI, even though from a well-being perspective, you can get into all the politics and the environmental issues. But AI is never going to be able to replace critical thinking, and actual brain power and human innovation. But for doing something like maybe automating task work, I will say I am not an organized person. So like using it to help me format a document, that's something, that's good. But yeah, we have past tested the limits. Our workforce is exhausted. You cannot squeeze any more productivity out of them, even though I think corporate is trying really hard. And we're seeing this backlash. We are constantly going from an employer job market to an employee job market. But it used to be more like this, and now it's like this, and this is not sustainable. So I think we are really coming to a reckoning, and we've seen that across the news cycle the last few weeks. Workers will push back, and our younger generation too, they're not going to take it. They're very good with their boundaries. So the worker and the workplace, it's a symbiotic relationship. So we live in this society, we all need wages to pay for things. We live in a capitalist world. But how can we create sustainable organizations with healthy, thriving humans? And some of our most successful companies balance those things really well. So we need to get more organizations doing that, more organizations focusing on their people. And then when you focus on your people, profitability comes. So I think there's a lot of work to do on the organizational side to really make the workplace better. I don't know. That was a very roundabout answer, but I didn't know you were going to ask that question, so got into a lot of different things.
Yeah. Well, I'd say, the visual you described of the labor market and, employer and employee, friendliness at different times, having deeper, troughs and higher peaks on either side of that equation, I think is definitely, fair. And, one of the things that we are trying to kind of reckon with here at Wellable internally, but also, of course, as we are getting exposure to so many different types of companies trying to do just what you described, right? Build a culture of well-being at the end of the day, is that balance of how do you incorporate, whether it's some form of AI or just new technologies, ways of working to help with efficiency or productivity, but not at the expense of like almost like that new form of burnout, right? Which I know burnout and stress is probably a topic near and dear to your heart. But on the one hand, even as you just gave the simple example of automating task management or coming up with a way to quickly format a document at the surface level, that could seem pretty nice, right? You get a little time back, get a higher quality output. So do you feel like we're just kind of in one of those stages of like, this is new, companies are over rotating into it. Employees maybe aren't as just accustomed to kind of some of the new ways of working, and will eventually find a bit of a healthy balance. Like, you feel like there is balance to be had here with some sort of natural, again, settling into use of tools, not at the expense of again, kind of personal stress or personal kind of feelings towards burnout?
Absolutely, yes. We're in kind of, gosh, where to even start with this? Employers tend to focus on trends a lot, and a lot of employers tend to be reactionary instead of strategic. And so when something like AI comes along and it becomes this big trend, you see a lot of new companies pop up selling AI, then everyone feels pressure to embed AI into whatever product they're selling. And then employers are like, oh my gosh, we're behind, we must be doing AI. And trends are never always the answer. So it's good to pay attention to trends, but you always have to take that step back and think about, is this right for my organization? Is it right for my business? Is it right for my people? And if you decide as an organization you're going to implement a tool like AI, as with any tool, are you thinking about it strategically? How are we going to teach our workforce how to use it? How are we going to educate them? Are we going to empower them? Are we going to spend the time and resources to truly train supervisors, to actually train workers? What I've heard a lot of is this has been forced upon us with no training, no resources, just, hey, use this. And it's not really helpful. It just creates, I think, more work and mental load. And if you're going to use a tool like AI, hopefully it would be reducing mental load, not contributing to it. And instead, I think it's contributing to it. And then when we think about innovation, which we always want to be focusing on, how do we innovate and iterate? We can't lose that human critical thinking ability and that ability to be creative. If we just start to rely on AI instead of using it as a tool, I think that's a really scary place to be. But I think we're in the trend cycle. We're in the AI bubble. The AI bubble is going to burst. And who knows what it's going to look like in the future. We've had automation tools for a very long time. So I think we'll continue to see it in some kind of automation, but hopefully it won't be as shoving down everyone's throats the way it is right now.
And it can be isolating, right? And I think that's what I've had, conversations with colleagues about, is how if you go down these rabbit holes of, trying to learn about a new piece of technology and almost feel like it's, on you to do that in a silo, and you lose the ability to, or maybe the natural inclination to seek out support for a particular task or project, or just think that, it might be better served for, problem solving kind of with the help of ChatGPT or Claude or whatever tool you like to use. And one thing that we found that works internally quite well is like forcing the co-work nature of it. So if you are going to work on some sort of complex problem, using a piece of AI, to do that in like a group work setting, because it does avoid some of those feelings of isolation and overwhelm that can occur if, again, you're just doing this on your own, without any sort of human guidance or interaction, or even enjoying some of the small victories or wins you get when you discover, like, oh, I could just automate this way, or this is a roadblock that I'm not getting anywhere with. Like, what's another way to go about that? I mean, of course, like I mentioned before, the core tenets of what I hear from you so consistently are around just thinking about the best strategies to help employees avoid burnout, avoid that consistent stress, and really set up organizations that are built for the long term. So absent of kind of the some of these trends that we're seeing kind of in more the technology space, what are some other things that you're seeing employers really either lean into to try to help employees achieve some of those personal goals, or conversely stay away from right now?
I think the most progressive employers and healthiest employers are continuing to do, or they're leaning into what we know works. I think a lot of times we overcomplicate this idea of workplace well-being, and we're always looking for the next best thing, and it's just hard, messy human work. It really is. We know at our core we all have some of the same needs to be seen, heard, and valued. So it's, how do we create environments like that? So with employee listening, and I like to say there's no such thing as survey fatigue. It's inaction fatigue. We don't get tired of giving our opinion. We love to give opinion. We love to complain. We all have a little negativity bias in our brains. But when we're sharing our opinion and then our organization doesn't actually make a change or put something into place, that's when we see tension occur. And have we created a space where people feel like they belong? Do you walk into work every day and you don't feel like you belong there? You feel ostracized. You don't feel like you're a part of the organization. And that takes a toll on your mental health and then, of course, your physical health. And then, valued. We know so many things are important, like recognition and autonomy and feelings of purpose. Work doesn't need to be your purpose, but work can be something that provides for you so you can live in your purpose. So I think it's a lot of these. It's a lot of leadership stuff. It's a lot of, soft skills. It's a lot of business 101 too. Like, what is your organization's mission, vision, values? And do you truly let those core values guide your decision making? Are they embedded into your policies? Are they embedded into your practices? The worst behavior you tolerate is your culture. Is a very common saying. I'm not the only one who says something like that. And it only takes one toxic person to infect a whole workplace. So I think employers are always struggling a lot. A lot of employers, I think they want to do the right thing. I don't think most employers are evil. I think most employers want to do the right thing. They want to take care of their workforce, but it's really overwhelming work because it's humans, and humans are a huge variable factor. I like to say we're all a bunch of trauma bags in the workplace. And so we're coming to work with that every day. So it's how do we just get back to getting along, being civil, finding out ways to work together. We've labored since the beginning of time. Labor is not the issue, but the way in which we work really needs a reckoning. And I think some organizations have always done great and they continue to be progressive, and other organizations are really trailing behind, and it's not sustainable.
The inaction piece that you mentioned from surveying, right, and asking employees and trying to listen, that stuck with me. The the cost of inaction, or the reason for inaction for an employer, maybe there is a very clear decision to be made by an organization. They hear employee feedback, but they're not prepared to act on it for X, Y, Z. Do you feel like the gap there for those organizations who aren't maybe doing enough is that in the face of inaction, they're not always providing a clear communication as to why a certain policy exists or why it won't be changed, to at least address all those voices and make them know that they're heard, and even though something won't be changed, here's a clear reason why.
Yes, I think a lot of organizations aren't following just basic best practices when it comes to employee listening. I always think you should use a third party. I don't want to fill out any survey my employer sends me. There's also a difference between anonymous and confidential. So if you send me an email and it says, hey, please take this survey, and then I get another email saying, hey, you haven't taken the survey yet, but don't worry, you can't be identified. Confidential and anonymous are two different things. And what you just asked, Geoff, it's if you can't do anything with the information, you're not ready to ask the question. So if you don't have money for wages, don't ask about wages. If you don't have money to change benefits, don't ask about benefits. Focus on what is within your control as an organization. And when you get feedback, you always have to respond to it. Even if it's a no or a not now or a not yet or we're not sure, you always have to respond. So you have to let your workforce know, hey, we did hear you. Here's what you said. You can give a summary. And if it's a problem you want to address, but you're just not sure, like you're short-staffed. Hey, we know we're short-staffed. We know everyone's stretched thin right now. We don't know how to solve this yet, but at our next, all hands, we will be sure to bring this up. And then you have to bring it back up. And when you do take in information and you make those changes, you want to remind your workforce that, hey, based on your feedback last year, this is the change we made to our annual meeting. And, we hope you all appreciated that. Please give us your feedback this year so we can continue to improve. So eventually you should get to a place of more homeostasis where, of course, you're always trending a little bit up, a little bit down, but it should be really small data points. It shouldn't be these big like things we need to fix. That's in an ideal kind of workplace setting. So I think really just understanding how to do some employee listening and how to take in the information, how to respond to it, and how to demonstrate that you are doing something. So yeah, I think a lot of organizations, they think they're special. And so they have to have their own survey. They need to write their own questions. And it's like, you really don't. And if you do need some, individual cultural questions or things specific to your industry, your vertical, or maybe your culture, but work with someone who's trained in that. Survey design is an art and science. And so work with someone who's trained on how to develop qualitative, quantitative survey data. I know I'm being very nerdy here, but don't just like Google some survey questions. there is a quote unquote like right way to do some survey design.
Right. There's probably a right way to do that design to inform your overall strategy, right? And I imagine what is so common is that companies are so busy, trying to put a variety of different plans into action and put out a survey, maybe get some feedback that could point towards something like resiliency being an area of need or something like that. And so the knee-jerk reaction might be, okay, let's bring in a resilience speaker or do something very targeted to address that pain point and then move on with that, right? And say, okay, we took care of that. So how do you see that kind of manifesting, with different companies that inevitably are kind of falling into that sort of pattern? And how do the best ones rise above it and take that data, acknowledge it, and allow it to inform a bigger picture ongoing strategy and be a bit more strategic with how they deploy resources, initiatives, on an ongoing basis?
I love the example you gave because if we did some employee listening and people did say they want a specific training, then that's a great decision to maybe invest in a specific kind of training. But what I see often happen is organizations are just deciding that people are stressed, so we need to buy something. People need to bounce back better, so we're going to focus on resiliency. But they're not actually uncovering, like peeling that onion back and figuring out what's causing the issue in the first place. And organizations tend to focus on here, fix yourself. Here, we're going to invest in all these things. Here you go, Geoff. I bought you all these things. I want you to fix yourself. And your job as an employer is not to fix your workforce. You do want to be there for them. You do want to support them. But look, you have to look in the mirror. Your job is to create an environment that does not cause harm. That's within your control. As an organization, we can control our policies, how we train our leaders, how, what the environment is like. We can control things like benefits and programs, but we want to support our workforce. And that doesn't mean being their therapist or being their parent, but, how do you just support them as a human in this messy world and help them, through difficult times. I think if you are doing good listening and it informs, then you let people know, hey, based on your feedback, we've decided to implement this, or maybe you just don't implement it right away. Maybe you say, based on the feedback, here's what we heard and here's what we're thinking about. Is this something you would like to be interested in? So if we see a commonality, like if we're able to pull something out, it's then how do we address that? Because maybe you pull out people are stressed and you say, okay, we're going to do resiliency training. But we ask people, would a resiliency training be helpful? Would it be helpful to train supervisors? And then maybe they come back and say, actually, that's not the issue at all. The issue is this equipment keeps breaking or we're having a problem with IT. And, it's like, don't be afraid to ask more questions. So that way you can make an investment that really benefits your people and your organization. I think a lot of employers invest so much money in good ideas that their workforce doesn't actually value. And that's a huge gap we see where employers get frustrated because they've spent money on these amazing programs or benefits or resources, but it's not what the actual needs are of their workforce. So again, you've got to get really comfortable asking questions. And then if you haven't developed though things like, psychological safety, it's harder to get those responses, but we have to start somewhere. And I've had experience with employers where maybe we didn't get a lot of responses from, a pulse survey that we did, but we got some and we took action. And I loved how you mentioned communications, huge piece of it. So we communicated it, and then when people saw, oh gosh, they did do something, then when the next opportunity for, asking questions, they answered. So we kept seeing response rates increase over time because they were like, oh, they are doing something now, so maybe I will actually, answer this question because they did that last time. So, if we're in a not so great place in our workplace, we've got to start somewhere. You got to start to make improvements somewhere, and over time, hopefully, you just get that continuous improvement.
So, you brought up a couple different mechanisms there for listening and capturing feedback, right? Whether it's through, a pulse survey, of course, manager to direct report conversations, right? And there's ways to influence best practices at all levels. You can design a better survey. You can issue them at a more thoughtful cadence. What you do with the data is, of course, critical. And then you can provide, trainings to managers on how to have, good conversations and be active and thoughtful listeners. Are there any other, just kind of general best practices that you think would be good for the audience to know when it comes to how to get beyond, the employee listening 101 and really, kind of take it to the next level to truly hear employees and position yourselves as a company to take action on that, or like I said, at least just be get great use out of the data?
I think we've shared a lot of it. I would consider, partnering with someone who does maybe do this work exclusively. It's really hard to do it homegrown, but if you have to do it homegrown because of budget constraints, resources, there's indexes out there that you can use that are free. There's a lot of indexes that have been developed, or surveys that have been developed by professionals, and a lot of times they even include like, here's how you score this. So you don't need to make up your own thing. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are so many resources out there you can leverage. Again, that's one of the reasons why I started Wellbeing Think Tank, was to help people find like accessible evidence-based resources and say, hey, try this, maybe you can do this. But I think we honestly covered a lot of them. The anonymity I would lean into again. So do you really need to know, or do you want to know? Maybe that's the last point I'll drive home, is there's a big difference between need and want. And you do typically need some segmentation depending on what problem you're trying to solve for. So a lot of the segmentation I'll use is potentially location. If we're dealing with, a large organization with multiple locations, I like to ask the question of, are you a people supervisor or a people leader? And I usually have a logic based. So are you a supervisor? Yes or no? If yes, I know how to access and use all the tools and resources and benefits provided to me by my employer so I can support my team. And then if no, I feel like my supervisor provides me with the information, on everything that my organization provides to support my health and well-being, job growth, etc. So I like the supervisor segmentation. I usually like location. Sometimes depending on specific issues, we might look at something like length of employment, but you probably don't need to know who they are. You want to know who they are, but you really don't need to, and that's not going to help really fix anything. So I think being honest with yourself on what is the most important data and what are you trying to get from asking these questions. Just last week, and I owe her an email, I was talking to a client who said, hey, do you happen to have any like benefits survey questions? And I said, yes, I have like a whole index. What are you trying to solve for? Like, what are you trying to decide? And it was like, oh, I'm not really sure. Like, here's the problem we're having. And I'm like, great. So here's all these different ways you as an organization might be able to address the issue. So how would we want to shape this survey to get the type of data we need? So instead of just, I think, being intentional and being strategic of what's the problem we're trying to solve for, what questions do we need to be asking? What are we prepared to do with the data we hear? So I think just being a little bit more thoughtful. Again, life is so busy, work is so busy, we tend to be very reactionary. And so how can we stop being reactionary and start to be more strategic with our decision making, which will do better in the long run? It takes a little bit of extra effort at first to take that time, but it's good to maybe even respond immediately and say, hey, we're noticing this. we're preparing to do something. We want to make sure we collect your thoughts in the right way. So, here's what we're preparing to do. We'll be in touch. Communications is such a core piece of workplace well-being and workplace culture. So I think communications can make or break an organization's culture. So I'm so glad you brought up communications too, because I think it's such a critical piece.
Yeah, that's well said, and definitely valuable for the folks listening. To be sure, we'll drop it in the show notes. They can check out all the Wellbeing Think Tank resources that you mentioned. Chase, one thing that we love to do with any guests of the podcast is to ask you for one prediction for the future, right? Something that you feel like there's enough kind of momentum behind something, or we're just on kind of the precipice of some kind of new development. Obviously, there's a lot in the headlines now. Some maybe a little bit more on the negative front, right? So I'll leave it up to you if it's going to be a positive development, or maybe a negative trend to be on the lookout for. But would love to hear one of your Chaseisms or your Chase predictions.
I feel regretful that I have to say I think things are going to continue to get worse before they get better. Yeah, we're not at the bottom of the barrel yet, which I really hate to say. And I've been really lucky the last few weeks. I've keynoted with a couple different organizations and got into some really intense, like esoteric conversations, which I love. And I do think it's going to get worse, unfortunately. I think things are going to continue to get worse. But it doesn't have to be your organization. And I've been so lucky in my career, Geoff. I worked with organizations that were so healthy pre-pandemic that they thrived during the pandemic. I have examples of organizations where their mental health did not get worse. We were still focusing on like basic stuff because they had such a healthy, thriving culture. And that's what creates resiliency in organizations. So you can continue to be a successful company and drive revenue. And of course, your workers need to be able to share in that revenue. I do think we're going to have a reckoning with wages. It's something I learned very on in my career. I remember my first corporate job and I got my raise and it was like 3%. And they were like, oh no, Chase, that's like really good. And I was like, but wait, our health insurance went up by this month. Like my rent just increased by like 10%. It's like, I'm losing. Like, how am I in this losing game here? And, there's so much data, productivity and wages are not equal, productivity up, wages down here. And the cost of living is extreme. I really get upset when we disparage our younger generation. And I'm a Gen Xer, I'm almost 50, but I'm also a person who grew up in children's services and got emancipated, didn't have any family support. If I was a young worker in this world right now, I don't know how I would survive. So I really have a lot of empathy and sympathy for them. So I think we need to think differently about how we organize our work. I'd love to see more employee-owned organizations. I think we're going to start to see hopefully maybe more ESOPs and employee ownership. I think that's how you can get more buy-in from your workforce. People don't not want to work. They want to contribute. They just want to be in a place that they feel like genuinely values their health and well-being. And I know this is really long, but I was so surprised. I just entered an internship with 4 high schoolers. So we were a part of an organization. It was our first time doing it. And I interviewed all these high schoolers, and one, they were brilliant. Like when I was 16, I was like, not a good kid. So I was so impressed with them, but I asked, none of them wanted to go into workplace well-being. They had different aspirations, but they were very interested in working and interning at Wellbeing Think Tank. And I asked why. And one young man, he said he was going to go into financial services, very into the financial sector. And he said, yeah, I used to think I wanted to like work on Wall Street and, I'd start my career there. And of course, the first couple of years would be really hard. But then hopefully as I got more experience, it would level out. And he goes, as I've started researching and talking to people, and he goes, man, a lot of people are divorced and they're stressed and they have heart attacks. And he's like, that sounds horrible. So I'm really thinking about what I'm going to do differently. And all of them said, they all want to work, and they all are so altruistic and they want to change the world, but but they want to be somewhere where they feel like they're seen, heard, and valued. It's really that basic. It's hard, messy human work, but I really think we can get there. I'm very an altruistic and optimist at heart. I think we can change the workplace, and I think if we change workplaces, we can change the world. Because I always say, imagine a world where we all left work and we felt good. Like imagine how that carries over into our communities and society. Less road rage, like less anger, like nicer interactions. I think we can get there, but it's going to take a lot of structural change on the backs of a lot of different people, not just workplaces, not just individuals. It's going to take a lot of work from a lot of people, but I think we can get there.
Totally. I love that sentiment. And if the Wellbeing Think Tank interns are any indication, I'd say the future is bright for those who are up and coming in the workforce. Chase, thank you so much for joining today. This was great. Where should folks go to learn more about you and Wellbeing Think Tank?
Yes, please come visit our website. It's wellbeingthinktank.org. It is always changing. To be very honest, built our website, so I'm always kind of changing it and figuring out what I need to do differently. I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can always connect with me at Chase Sterling. I'm just Chase at wellbeingthinktank.org. Feel free to reach out to me. So I spend a lot of my time leading the organization, and then I still do some advising, and I do a lot of speaking and helping organizations. So yeah, if I can be of service to anyone, whether it's through Think Tank or my own work, happy to connect, always happy to share ideas and evidence-based insights on what we know truly can move the needle for people and workplaces and our society. We can make it better.
Amazing. Well, thanks again, Chase, and thanks to our audience, as always, for tuning in. Reminder, you can listen to Wellable Weekly on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Watch us on YouTube, and definitely subscribe to Wellable Weekly newsletter for all of our latest insights. Thank you.